What if I told you the FIA has been planning a secret strike against McLaren? Not a theory. Not speculation. Actual internal data shows a silent plan to dismantle McLaren's 2026 edge before the lights even go out. From buried files to last-minute rule edits, this is the side of Formula One they hope fans never discover. Until now. If you want to stay ahead of every twist, every leak, and every shadow war in F1, smash that subscribe button right now. You won't believe what's next. Something changed inside the FIA. It wasn't announced publicly. It didn't come through a flashy press release. But in the technical documentation reviewed by internal team analysts, something shifted. The trigger? McLaren's quiet but undeniable surge in simulation performance for the 2026 season. While teams like Red Bull and Mercedes made headlines, McLaren had been developing something under the radar. It wasn't loud. It wasn't public. But it was real. Their wind tunnel data combined with new engine mapping simulations showed a potential aerodynamic breakthrough, one that could tilt the grid balance in their favor. That triggered concern deep within the FIA's regulatory division. Not because McLaren was breaking rules, but because they were too far ahead within them. There's a long-standing philosophy inside the FIA: if one team exploits a gray area too well, the rulebook must evolve. And that's precisely what happened. FIA officials began internal talks about competitive equity and aero standardization, keywords that often precede a regulation clampdown. Quiet meetings followed. Teams weren't invited. No press were tipped off. This was handled discreetly and surgically. By early November, McLaren's internal alerts flagged inconsistencies between earlier and revised FIA technical guidance. Specific wording around rear-wing flexibility and active aero deployment had been modified. Not massively, but just enough to force a redesign of their rear platform. Some engineers within McLaren believed the changes were directly targeting their latest concept. A few used the word sabotage. It was no longer about compliance, it was about interpretation. And the new interpretation nullified key components McLaren had invested months into developing. McLaren's leadership, including CEO Zak Brown and technical director Peter Prodromou, realized quickly what was happening. This wasn't routine regulatory clarification. This was a targeted response. Other teams were using similar concepts, but McLaren's system, more aggressive, more integrated, became the template for what was now forbidden. Internally, frustration turned to fury. In a sport where milliseconds define legacy, McLaren had seen their strategic edge clipped in real time without a single vote, and without any public explanation. The consequences were immediate. Development timelines had to be rewritten. New parts scrapped. Staff reassigned. The aero department was forced into emergency recalibration just weeks before pre-season manufacturing. The loss of momentum was massive, not just technical, but psychological. Inside Woking, morale took a hit. For a team that had clawed its way back into contention through sheer innovation, this felt like a door slammed shut just as they reached the threshold. And while McLaren was hit hardest, the paddock began whispering. Rival engineers questioned why only McLaren's concept triggered this sudden clampdown. Technical directors from two other top teams, speaking off-record, confirmed they had submitted similar design elements with no objections. It added weight to a darker theory. McLaren was being punished not for cheating but for getting too clever too early. And the FIA, fearing a repeat of dominant eras, decided to pull the rug before the public ever noticed. But now, it's out. The hidden game has been exposed. The FIA may not have said it directly, but the evidence speaks loud enough. McLaren had found something. The FIA found a way to stop it. And now the 2026 season could be defined not by pure racing, but by how much power still lies behind closed doors. When McLaren's aerodynamic concept was struck down, the immediate impact wasn't just on their aero department, it sent shockwaves through the entire engineering division. Engineers who had worked tirelessly for months suddenly found themselves scrambling to adjust to a moving target. The active aero package, which McLaren believed would revolutionize energy recovery and straight-line speed, was no longer compliant under the revised FIA technical directive. It wasn't outlawed explicitly, but the new phrasing rendered their design inoperable within legal limits. That's where the pressure began to mount. The team had been developing a dual-mode aerodynamic system that would activate under specific high-load and DRS zones, providing both drag reduction and cornering stability. This system had been tested in CFD environments for over 6 months, and preliminary results placed McLaren ahead of schedule in reaching their 2026 targets. Now, with new constraints on movable surfaces and tighter energy harvesting parameters, the entire system had to be re-engineered, not optimized, rebuilt from the ground up. Every millimeter of aerogeometry had to be revisited. What made things even more complex was the lack of official transparency. The FIA refused to comment on why certain elements had suddenly become unclear. This vagueness created a minefield for McLaren's engineering leads. Should they push forward with another innovation, or would that too be quietly blocked later? This ambiguity made long-term planning almost impossible. Engineers were left in a reactive mode, constantly second-guessing how far they could go before drawing unwanted attention. That kind of climate kills momentum and confidence. Behind the scenes, simulator data was also affected. McLaren's entire software architecture had been modeled around expected drag coefficients and ERS deployment linked to the now obsolete design. With revised aero figures coming in and energy loss increasing due to reduced harvesting efficiency, lap times in the simulator dropped by over 0.7 of a second. For a team aiming to fight for podiums, that's catastrophic. Those numbers don't just dent optimism, they destroy it. And as if that weren't enough, their 2026 power unit integration suffered unexpected complications. McLaren had been working closely with their powertrain supplier to optimize battery cooling and torque mapping, all based on aerodynamic flow. With the rear airflow concept altered, cooling efficiency dropped. That meant higher operating temperatures and reduced performance during long stints. Engineers now faced a domino effect. One FIA revision had triggered 5 new engineering crises. Each one drained resources, time, and more critically morale. The stress eventually filtered up the ladder. Executive-level meetings turned tense, with senior management demanding answers on why these issues weren't predicted. But the truth was simple: no one could have predicted this. The FIA's regulatory shift wasn't forecastable. It wasn't part of the normal technical review cycle. It was in McLaren's eyes a surgical strike disguised as a routine clarification. And once engineering confidence breaks, everything else begins to unravel. By the end of the quarter, McLaren had already burned through a large portion of their design contingency budget, money meant for performance upgrades, not crisis management. In Formula One, every dollar spent fixing a problem is a dollar you don't spend winning a race. And right now, McLaren isn't building from a position of strength, they're surviving a wave of pressure created not by rivals, but by a governing body that seems determined to keep the field tightly packed. Within the private circles of the paddock, very few things happen by accident. The silence around the FIA's revised 2026 interpretations wasn't a coincidence. It was deliberate, a calculated maneuver orchestrated behind closed doors, with the aim of protecting competitive balance while projecting neutrality. But insiders at McLaren are not buying the facade. They believe what happened was part of a larger, deeply political game, a move meant to check their momentum without igniting public backlash. And it all started with a single, private meeting held weeks before the directive reached teams. According to one senior source inside Woking, a confidential discussion took place between 2 FIA advisors and a technical delegate from a rival team. The meeting was described as routine in official documents. But the outcome was anything but. Days after that exchange, the FIA circulated a revised clarification document to teams regarding active aero and energy deployment tolerances. It was worded in a way that technically affected all teams, but only McLaren had built their design philosophy so aggressively around those gray areas. As a result, only they had to pivot completely. In Formula One, technical rules are a battlefield. Every team looks for loopholes, and every governing body decides which ones are too clever to let stand. But when enforcement comes selectively and without transparency, suspicion grows. Other teams privately admitted they had submitted similar design concepts during prior clarification phases, yet received no objections. Only McLaren, it seems, were handed a regulatory dead end. The question now circulating behind the scenes: why? Some within McLaren believe the FIA is reacting to a perceived imbalance in innovation pace. There's an unspoken fear among regulators that one team pulling too far ahead too early will undermine the new regulations' intent to reset the competitive field. And McLaren, leveraging their rapid progress with active aero and lightweight packaging, were threatening to do just that. From the FIA's perspective, a dominant McLaren in 2026 would damage the narrative of parity and competition they've been promoting since the engine formula reboot was first proposed. There's also growing speculation about political pressure from rival constructors. Top teams with stronger influence at the commission level may have voiced concern over McLaren's trajectory, not through formal protest, but through quiet, persuasive conversations. In this sport, influence is as important as innovation. And McLaren, still rebuilding their authority after years of underperformance, are now paying the price of success that came a little too soon for the establishment's comfort. Zak Brown, never shy of a fight, has reportedly begun lobbying for clearer technical governance moving forward. In recent months, McLaren has requested written assurances from the FIA that future clarifications will follow a standardized consultation process. But the damage is already done. Trust between McLaren's leadership and the FIA is fractured. Not publicly. Not yet. But internally, the team is preparing for a 2026 season where off-track politics might be as decisive as on-track performance. In the end, this is not just about aerodynamics or engine mapping. It's about control. Who defines the limits of innovation? Who enforces them and why? When the rules can shift behind the scenes, and when interpretations can be used as weapons, no design is safe. For McLaren, the 2026 campaign is no longer just about competing, it's about surviving a system that may not be as neutral as it pretends to be.